Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. I'm Enrico from Avanscoperta. I'm really pleased to have Bjarte Bogsnes with us today. Hello, Bjarte.
Hi, Enrico.
Yeah, how are you doing?
Good. And good to see you again.
Thanks a lot, Bjarte, for taking the time to be with us at our new episode of Small Talk. As you know, Small Talk is a live series where we explore the topics of our upcoming workshops, and we are very pleased to have Bjarte with us in Berlin next year. We are going to be there in April 2025 for his Beyond Budgeting Masterclass. Now, as you might know, Bjarte is a name often associated to Beyond Budgeting, and we are here to find out more about it, how to get started, what it is, and what you're going to experience during the actual masterclass, which is a 2-day in-person event that will happen next year, April, in Berlin. As usual, we are live on YouTube and LinkedIn. Feel free to post your comments or questions to Bjarte or us in the chat. We're going to read them out loud as we go along. Well, we're going to read them not necessarily out loud as we go along. So we're going to make this a bit interactive as well. So off we go, Bjarte. So Beyond Budgeting, what is it?
Well, first of all, it is a somewhat misleading name because this is about so much more than budgets. It is about challenging traditional management and leadership, which is, we would argue, based on two main assumptions. Number one, that you can't trust people. And number two, that the future is predictable and plannable. And none of the two are true. And that is what we are challenging. So Beyond Budgeting is a management model that has a positive view on people, employees, and also offers much more adaptive or agile, or whatever you want to call it, ways of leading and managing. So we have had long discussions, should we change this name or not? Because we know it's misleading, but it has become a brand, and it has one benefit. It provokes people. And if we can use that attention to explain what this really is about, then the name might have served its purpose. But of course, there is also a link to budgets, because at the core of the traditional management way of managing, then you find the budgeting process and the budgeting mindset, right? So it's impossible to change management and leadership unless you also address the budgeting process. So it's necessary, but not sufficient.
Awesome. Now I'm curious to know more about how the name came about and who came up with it. I guess you referred to a group of people, or was it you in the first place?
No, it was not me in the first place. It was actually two English authors and researchers, Jeremy Hope and Robin Fraser, who, and now we are back in the mid-90s, they discovered that some companies out there, mainly in Europe, had done interesting things around their leadership and management model, including budgeting and including kicking out the traditional budget. One of these companies were a Swedish bank, which I will talk a lot about in the masterclass. It's called Handelsbanken. But another company was a company called Borealis, which was Europe's largest petrochemicals company at the time. And I was heading up the finance function in this company. And we got the chance, through some coincidences, to kick out the budget in that company in 1995, and it worked wonderful. Cost, for instance, came down. Back then, there was nothing called Beyond Budgeting, so it was a bit scary, I have to admit, but it worked wonderful. And then, I think the year after, I saw a small advertisement in a UK magazine that these two guys were looking for companies that had done stuff in this area. So I called the UK number, got in touch with Jeremy, and they came over to Copenhagen, and we met. And we've been friends ever since. Jeremy has unfortunately passed away, but I have been involved in the Beyond Budgeting movement since then, and I've been the chairman of the Beyond Budgeting Roundtable for many, many years. That is a network of interested individuals and companies. So we have been operating actually since 1998. So Beyond Budgeting was born before the Agile Manifesto. There are many similarities between the two. No contact at the time. Fortunately, that has changed. Today, there's a lot of contact, and there should be, because this is about business agility in practice.
Just taking notes quickly, and this really captures the spirit of what you just said. It's also one of the headings on the workshop page that we are hosting. So considering all the background you shared, thanks Bjarte for that. I would say you are the best person right now to learn about Beyond Budgeting in the masterclass, which, as we mentioned, is a 2-day in-person event we are hosting in Berlin next year. So would you tell us something more about the actual event? Now we know what Beyond Budgeting is. We found out something about its name and the origins, and but then of course we distilled this somehow into a 2-day format where we have people in a room. And so what goes on there?
Well, first of all, I've been doing sessions on Beyond Budgeting for many, many years. Workshops, keynotes, shorter sessions, somewhat longer. It was actually a conference company that strongly encouraged me to do something longer than a 1-day session. We tried it, and it worked. And I have to say that, initially I thought 2 days, could that be a bit long for people participating? But the feedback has been extremely good. I have really enjoyed myself. So I really like this format, because then there is time for good, deep, broad discussions, engagement, dialogue, which, when it's only 1 day, because this topic is so big, actually 1 day can be, or typically is too short. So I promise participants and 2 unforgettable days. And if your feedback is as good as the other ones that other participants have had, then you will not have regretted participating here.
Indeed, we can't wait. And of course, hearing that, it's been iterated many times. So it kind of makes sense, because now we know we are in front of the real thing kind of thing. So that's great to know. So we'll be there for 2 days. But now let's go back a bit to the kind of topics of why is Beyond Budgeting a thing, why is it important, and why we've seen it working many times. So in which way is budgeting itself a problem? Of course, let's say it's one of the keywords, so it's in the title of the thing. So why is it a problem? Why we need to go beyond budgeting?
Yeah. Let me first define what we mean with a budget, because a lot of people think about budgets just as cost budgets. But the finest definition is broader. We talk about revenue budgets, profit and loss budgets, balance sheet budgets, cash flow budgets. So it's a broader definition. And one problem or one issue is that this is an extremely old management technology. Budgeting was actually invented 100 years ago, right? And I'm sure it worked well back then, maybe even 50 years ago. But today, this way of thinking, this way of leading, this way of managing is doing exactly the opposite of its original intentions, which was actually to help organizations perform better. And today, this way of managing is doing exactly the opposite. It has become more of a barrier than a support for getting out the best possible performance. And that problem list is long. It's a very time-consuming process. It creates gaming and lowballing, sandbagging, resource hoarding, frenzied December spending, a assumptions are quickly outdated. To define good performance as hitting budget numbers is a very narrow and very often a completely irrelevant way of defining good performance. Right, so we need a richer, broader, more intelligent definition of what is good performance. Is it, for instance, a good performance to hit your cost budget if you could have spent less or should have spent more, as one example? And how do you know upfront in the autumn what that right spending level is? How do you know exactly within that spending level what the right spending mix is? How do you know what is the right doses of travel cost for next year? We don't, but still we insist on putting numbers on this, and then these numbers become, which is a guess, becomes the truth that everything shall be managed against. I mean, it's I sometimes wish that we all woke up one morning with a collective memory loss within this area. We couldn't remember anything about how we were leading and managing. And I doubt very much that what we would then come up with would resemble anything like traditional budgeting. I think what we would come up with would be much closer to the stuff that we are talking about now.
Wow.
The problem is that we don't have that memory loss. And on the contrary, everybody remembers too well. And everybody is too scary to break out of it. Right? So fear is a big element here. The fear of losing control. While so many people haven't understood that control they are so afraid of losing, it's nothing but illusions of control, right? And I often say that yes, when people ask me, will we lose control? My response is that yes, we will lose some control, and we shall lose some control. That's the bad controls, the stupid controls. We will get more of what we call good controls. And one example of a good control mechanism is, for instance, transparency, which is a very simple self-regulating way of making sure that people spend money wisely. And I've got loads of examples of how transparency is used as a control mechanism in the masterclass.
Which links back, of course, to one of the 2 points you mentioned before, which are trusting people and predictability of the future. So the first point I'd like to stress now is this. So how do you enable a culture of trust, which basically is, I guess, one of the foundations of the whole beyond budgeting approach?
Yeah. The interesting thing is that when executives and managers are, especially executives, when they are asked, do you trust your employees? Then almost everybody will say, yes, of course, we only recruit the best, right? Of course we trust people. So, and sometimes I think they even mean it, not always, but sometimes. So that's not the issue. It's not the issue what these guys are saying, what they are writing. The issue is this reflected in their management processes? And the answer is so often no. That's the issue. This lack of coherence between what is said and what is done in organizations, right? These poisonous gaps between what is said and what is done. And the most classical example, or one classical example, is to, again, talk loud and warm about how fantastic employees we have on board, but then, and we trust you so much, but then still insist on detailed travel budgets. Again, hypocrisy. Or if the organization talks equally much about collaboration and teamwork and everybody in the same boat, but when it comes to rewards, it's all about individual bonus, right? Again, poisonous gaps between what is said and what is done, and people notice, and then the words become hollow, right? Because the management processes have the opposite message. So if you want to show that you're serious about trust, well, show it in your management processes, right? Which includes, for instance, kicking out the detailed travel budgets and a lot more. And trust me, generally and typically, cost does not explode if you apply the right control mechanisms to it. Very often, cost actually come down. But you can't. Leadership, including trust, is not something you can talk about in isolation, right? You have to kind of look over to your management processes and make sure that the words are reflected in those processes. And this is key in Beyond Budgeting, creating coherence between what is said and what is done. That is why Beyond Budgeting has 12 principles. 6 are on leadership, like purpose, autonomy, transparency, values, and 6 are on management processes: target setting, forecasting, resource allocation, performance evaluation, rewards, and also recommendations on the rhythm of all these processes. And a strong focus on creating coherence between what is said on leadership and what is practiced through these management processes.
Thanks, Bjarte. There's so many things resonating with what we've been talking about during these small talks interviews with our other trainers, meaning whether it's OKRs or portfolio management or, again, culture of trust and all of this. So, which brings me to asking you, so who is this for then? Because from what you say, it looks like it's for not, let's say, smaller companies, but maybe more corporate, bigger, teams, or is it not?
Well, I would argue it's both for the big and for the small. It's for the big, given that advice on how they can find their way back to that business agility they had as a smaller organization. Because I keep saying that companies are born beyond budgeting. They become something else when they want to grow, when they want to become big, because then they copy what the big companies are doing, and then they end up in the same misery of bureaucracy and rigidity and lack of engagement and all that. So for big companies, how can you find your way back without losing the benefit of being big? For small companies, how can you grow without ending up in the same misery? So for big and small, it's for managers, it's for finance people, it's for HR people, it's for agile people, it's for everybody interested in these important issues of leadership and management.
But definitely more for people who are, let's say, in charge or of someone else or some processes. Of course, others will benefit from it as well, but the change, of course, has to start probably from the top. Or what would you suggest?
Well, not necessarily. Of course, at one stage, the executives need to be on board, but most revolutions do not start at the top, right? So what you need are some brave and willing people that can take the lead on this and work on this to make it happen in the organization, including convincing executive teams.
Right. Yeah, makes perfect sense. Now that you were talking about the many types of companies benefiting from this, it came to my mind. So, okay, how does that? I know it's not exactly on point with the workshop, but I was just curious to know if you had any cases or suggestions or on how to make this happen. Let's say in a remote scenario. So, of course, that's how many of us are working right now. So it takes much more effort on one side, but I guess it's still something that can be entirely manageable.
Yeah. Before I answer that, let me add on one additional group which I would strongly recommend to participate, and that's the public sector. And I will share some amazing cases from the public sector where stuff is starting to happen. So that's also kind of another group. When it comes to kind of doing this, when you say remotely, if you're not working on site, is that what you're talking about?
Exactly.
Yeah, of course, everything in this area is more difficult when you are not in the same room, to put it that way. So if I could choose, I would always recommend try to be together. If it isn't possible, of course, don't let that be a showstopper. It is possible also, but the reason why this also is more challenging remotely is that this is not just about changing what we do. It is just as much about changing how we think, right? And my experience that is easier when you can look people directly in the eyes. When it comes to, there is no rocket science in beyond budgeting when it comes to changing what we do. We talk about rolling forecasts, relative targets, or maybe no targets, a holistic performance evaluation. But no rocket science. But if you do things or try to do things in a different way, with the same old mental models, then you will typically fail. And of course, that change in how you think is the most painful one, because so many people have grown up in that traditional way of doing it, believed in it, maybe made a career out of being good at it. And of course, it can be painful to admit that maybe we need to change. And that's why I think it's very important that we should be very careful in criticizing people for what they have done. What we shall try to get across is that things have changed. And because things have changed with the competence of employees, with the VUCA level of the business environment, because of that, we need to change how we work, right? But that recognition is accepting those changes, is that if you accept those changes, you have started to change how you think.
Which links to the second point, which is one of the assumptions that you mentioned at the beginning about the future, right? So change is not only, the overall evolution of things, but also the fact that we cannot predict things after all.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So, and this links back to the link between agility, business agility, and beyond budgeting, which is one of the points. Actually, I think it's one of the most powerful ones we have also in the workshop description, which is there's no real agile transformation without beyond budgeting.
Yeah, and that is something I will talk a lot about in the masterclass, and we will discuss that a lot, because I'm a big fan of Agile. So what I'm going to say now is no criticism of Agile at all. But Agile was not designed and developed as a way to run an enterprise, right? It was born in software development and meant to improve how software was developed and how teams work. And Agile was a huge success. But when you try to scale Agile, the holes in Agile become visible. All the things Agile didn't need to think about back then, because enterprise management was not kind of the key focus. These are the holes that beyond budgeting are filling, because beyond budgeting was born at enterprise level by people with deep and strong experience from corporate enterprise level. I think that is one of the main differences between Agile and beyond budgeting. But again, there are many similarities, and the two together can be extremely powerful. But Agile transformation without beyond budgeting, forget it. Forget it. I think that's why so many Agile transformations are struggling, because they have not realized that. These organizations are trying to scale Agile using exactly the same framework and language and labels that did wonders in the software development area and back then. But you can't scale it without kind of broadening this, and that is what beyond budgeting is doing.
Fantastic. Looks like there's going to be a lot to find out during the masterclass. So we're already touching on some very big topics here. That's all great, Bjarte. So for anyone watching us, feel free to drop comments or questions. We're going to be here for another 10-15 minutes. Now let's come back to the actual workshop. So of course, topics exist before the actual workshop, or that's the way it should be somehow. But this actually, beyond budgeting, became a workshop. So how did that happen? When did you start to deliver this, and why, basically? Was there a request in particular?
Yeah, it's as I mentioned, I've been doing things like this for almost 30 years now, since my beyond budgeting career started, and back in the mid 90s. In the beginning, there was a lot of interest in the finance community. Then it later spread to the HR community, and then to the agile community. And lately, again, quite a lot of interest from corporate level executives and also the consulting business. And now I'm talking about the big consulting companies, which have become seriously interested in beyond budgeting. So there's been requests for me doing this for a long time, so I've done a number of one-day workshops, but then it was this conference company that strongly encouraged me to run a 2-day session, and I'm very glad they did, because again, it has worked wonderful.
Fantastic. So one piece of advice, let's assume people can join in Berlin or just want to find out more, or just want to start with it. So how can one get started with beyond budgeting? What are the first steps?
No, I would definitely recommend people to check out the Beyond Budgeting Roundtable website. It's called BBRT.org, so Beyond Budgeting Roundtable.org, BBRT.org, which has a lot of information. You might also want to check out my simple website. That should be BBRT.org. O-R-G, not... Yeah. Might also want to check out my simpler website, bogsnesadvisory.com. And on both websites, you find reading recommendations and also other relevant stuff.
Awesome. Right. So we were discussing before about, and you've mentioned them already, about your activity as book writer as well. So I found out there are not 2 books, but 2.5 books. So how come? What happened here?
Yeah. Now, what happened was that back in 2008, I wrote my first book. It's called Implementing Beyond Budgeting, and it has, for finance people, then they might know the one who wrote the foreword. That was the American professor Robert Kaplan, who is the inventor of the so-called balanced scorecard. And then that book did really well, and a lot of people encouraged me to write a new book. My US publisher encouraged me to write the second edition first, and I ended up with something in between. So it's called the second edition, came out in 2016, Implementing Beyond Budgeting second edition, but it is there's a lot of new stuff in it compared to the other one. So that's why I call it, that was 1.5 book. What these 2 books have in common is that they have kind of normal book length of, say, 250 pages. That is too long for a number of busy people out there, including executives with limited time to read. So my last book, which came out recently, it's called This is Beyond Budgeting, is much shorter, more focused, so busy people can have time to read it. It's also out in an audiobook for those who can't even have, don't even have time to read, but they might drive from time to time or fly or whatever, and then the audiobook. This book, the latest one, has a foreword by Professor Gary Hamel, US-based, and Gary is, within the management innovation area, #1 in the world. He is simply unbelievable. If you haven't heard him, check out that guy on YouTube. He's got some amazing videos. He's simply dynamite. So I'm really, really proud that he wrote the foreword.
Awesome. That's very good stuff. So we'll type the name and link to some videos later on in the description. As I mentioned, we are about to close for today, so thank you, Bjarte, for this. I have a few more things I'd like to discuss with you. So, as we mentioned, it's not only a change about how we do things, but also about how we think. And of course, whenever you try to introduce something new and different, you might get good, but also bad response. So I wanted to know from you, what was the best and worst response to this approach? So anyone who said, yeah, no, we're not gonna do that, and what happened, or even worse, I don't know. And those who actually try to follow.
Yeah. Well, I think, of course, I mean, there are stories in both camps here when it comes to best and worst. But fortunately, much more good stories than bad stories. And fortunately, very few companies going back once they have started. I don't need one hand to count the number of companies going back. And we know the reasons why. It's about the 2-week case for change or a flawed implementation. But fortunately, these are the very few exceptions. The big majority do not go back. On the contrary, they become braver as they go along, because this is a journey where the direction is clearer than the destination, to the extent there is a destination. And what is scary today is not scary tomorrow, because it works. So so fortunately, I don't have many of these worst responses to share with you, because there's been so few. But of course, it has been sad the few times I have learned that companies are going back. Sometimes it's linked also to radical change in top management before this platform has become kind of solid enough to withstand some earthquakes that a top management change can be. But fortunately, again, these are the exceptions.
Awesome. And with this, I would say thank you very much, Bjarte. I'll just put quick. Is there anything you'd like to add before we close that we haven't covered by any chance?
Well, I really hope to see you guys in Berlin. And what I've learned is that you guys are very professional organizers of conferences, so I'm very comfortable with that, and I'm sure it's going to be a fantastic masterclass, and you will not regret it. Thank you.
Fantastic, Bjarte. Thanks for your time, for the nice words, and below you can find a link to the masterclass. See you there. Let's all start with Beyond Budgeting, and